I grew up in a small port town in the northeast of England, squashed nicely beside an adjoining river of the Humber estuary. This town, like most, is of no particular interest. The town is dull and weathered, with the only interesting qualities being the town's rather large and irregularly shaped water towers, which the townfolk nicknamed salt and pepper pots. If you find a picture of these water towers, you'll see how they acquired their names. My early childhood here was basic. I went to primary school and acquired a large group of friends who only had one thing in common. We were all obsessed with football. If we weren't playing football at break time, we were playing after school at the park, or on the weekend for our local team. My friends and I were all in the same class, and by the time we were in our final primary school year, we had all acquired nicknames. My nickname was Airbag, simply because my last name is Airy, just as George Sutton was Sutty, and Lewis Jeffers was Jaffers. I should count my blessings though, because playing football in the park, some of the older kids started calling me Airy Bollocks. Thank God that name never stuck. Now that I think of it, some of us didn't even have nicknames. Dre was just Dre, and Brandon was just Brendan. Out of this group of preteen boys, my best friend was Kai. He didn't have a nickname either. Kai was a gelled-up, spiky-haired kid with a very feminine laugh, who was so good at ping pong no one could ever return his serves, not even the teachers. Kai was also extremely irritating, always finding some new way to piss me off, but it was always funny whenever he pissed off one of the girls in school, rather than me. For example, he would always trip some poor girl over in the classroom, which he then replied with, "Have a nice trip," followed by that girly high-pitched laugh of his.
"Kat, it's not Emily's fault no one wants to go out with you,"
one of the girls smartly replied. By the time we all turned 11, we had just graduated primary school and were on the cusp of starting secondary. Thankfully, we were all going to the same high school, so although we were saying goodbye to primary, we would all still be together. Before we started that nerve-wracking first year of high school, we still had several free weeks left of summer to ourselves. Although I thought this would mostly consist of football every day, we instead decided to make the most of it, before making that scary transition from primary school kids to teenagers. During one of these first free days of summer, my friends and I were making our way through a suburban street on the edge of town. At the end of this street was a small play area, but beyond that, where the town's borders officially end, we discovered a very small and narrow wooded area, adjoining to a large field of long grass. We must have liked this new discovery of ours, because less than a day later, the wooded area became our brand new den. The trees were easy to climb, and due to how the branches were shaped, as though made for children, we could easily sit on them without any fears of falling. Every day, we came routinely to hang out and play in our den. We always did the same things here. We would climb or sit in the trees, all the while talking about a range of topics from football, girls, our new discovery of adult videos on the internet, and, of course, what starting high school was going to be like. I remember one day in our den, we had found a piece of plastic netting, and trying to be creative, we unsuccessfully attempted to make a hammock, attaching the netting to different branches of the close-together trees. No matter how many times we tried, whenever someone climbs into the hammock, the netting would always break, followed by the loud thud of one of us crashing to the ground. Perhaps growing bored by this point, our group eventually took to exploring further around the area. Making our way down this narrow section of woods, we eventually stumble upon a newly discovered creek, which separated our den from the town's rugby club on the other side. Although this creek was rather small, it was still far too deep and by no means narrow enough that we could simply walk or jump across it. Thankfully, whoever discovered this creek before us had placed a long wooden plank across it, creating a far from sturdy bridge. Wanting to cross to the other side and continue our exploration, we were all far too weary, in fear of losing our balance and falling into the brown, less than sanitary water.
"Don't let Sooty cross, he'll break in the middle,"
Kai hysterically remarked, followed by his familiar high-pitched cackle. By the time it was clear, everyone was too scared to cross. We then resort to daring each other. Being the attention seeker that I was at that age, I accepted the dare and cautiously began to make my way across the thin, warping wood of the plank. Although it took me a minute or two to do so, I successfully reached the other side, gaining the validation I craved from my group of friends. Some time later, everyone else had become brave enough to cross the plank, and after a short while, this plank crossing had become its very own game. Due to how unsecure the plank was in the soft mud, we all took turns crossing back and forth, until someone eventually lost their balance or footing, crashing leg first into the foot-deep creek. Once this plank walking game of ours eventually ran its course, we then decided to take things further. Since I was the only one brave enough to walk the plank, my friends were now daring me to try and jump over to the other side of the creek. Although it was a rather long jump to make, I couldn't help but think of the glory that would come with it, of not only being the first to walk the plank, but the first to successfully jump to the other side. Accepting this dare too, I then worked up the courage. Setting up for the running position, my friends stand aside for me to make my attempt, all the while chanting, "Air back, air back, air back." Taking a deep, anxious breath, I make my run down the embankment before leaping a good meter over the water beneath me, and like a long jumper at the Olympics, which was taking place in London that year, I land, desperately clawing through the weeds of the other embankment until I was safe and dry on the other side. Just as it was with the plank, the rest of the group eventually worked up the courage to make what seemed to be an impossible jump. And although it took a good long while for everyone to do, we had all successfully leaped to the other side. Although the plank walking game was fun, this had now progressed to the creek jumping game, and not only was I the first to walk the plank and jump the creek, I was also the only one who managed to never fall into it. I honestly don't know what was funnier, whenever someone jumped to the other side except 1 foot in the water, or when someone lost their nerve and just fell straight in, followed by the satirical laughs of everyone else. Now that everyone was capable of crossing the creek, we spent more time that summer exploring the grounds of the rugby club. The town's rugby club consisted of 2 large rugby fields, surrounded on all sides by several wheat fields and a long stretch of road, which led either in or out of town. By the side of the rugby club's building, there was a small area of grass, which the creek's embankment directly led us to. By the time our summer break was coming to an end, we took advantage of our newly explored area to play a huge game of hide and seek, which stretched from our den all the way to the grounds of the rugby club. This wasn't just any old game of hide and seek. In our version, whoever was the seeker, or who we called the catcher, had to find who was hiding, chase after and tag them, in which the tagged person would also have to be a catcher and help the original catcher find everyone else. On one afternoon, after playing this rather large game of hide and seek, we all gather around the small area of grass behind the club, ready to make our way back to the den via the creek. Although we were all just standing around, talking for the time being, one of us then catches sight of something in the cloudless clear sky.
"Stop playing,"
Jaffers unsurely inquired.
"What else would it be?"
replied Sooty, or maybe it was Dre, with either of their typical condescension.
Jaffers thinks it's a flying saucer,"
Kai piled on, followed as usual by his helium-filled laugh. Turning up to the distant sky with everyone else, what I see is a plane-shaped object flying surprisingly low. Although its dark body was hard to distinguish, The aircraft seems to be heading directly our way, and the closer it comes, the more visible yet unclear the craft appears to be. Although it did appear to be an airplane of some sort, not a plane I or any of us had ever seen. What was strange about it was as it approached from the distance above, hardly any sound or vibration could be heard or felt.
"Are you sure that's a plane?"
inquired Jaffers once again. Still flying our way, low in the sky, the closer the craft comes, the less it begins to resemble any sort of plane. In fact, I began to think it could be something else, something that, if said aloud, should have been met with mockery. As soon as the thought of what it could be enters my mind, Dre, as though speaking the minds of everyone else standing around, bewilderingly utters,
Is that...
Before Dre can finish his sentence, the craft, confusing us all, not only in its appearance but the lack of sound as it comes closer into view, is now directly over our heads. And as I look above me to the underbelly of the craft, I have only one instant thought. Oh my God. Once my mind processes what soars above me, I am suddenly overwhelmed by a paralyzing anxiety. But the anxiety I feel isn't one of terror, but some kind of awe. Perhaps the awe disguised the terror I should have been feeling, because once I realized what I was seeing was not a plane, my next thought, impressed by the many movies I've seen, is, am I going to be taken? As soon as I think this to myself, too frozen in astonishment to run for cover, I then hear someone in the group yell, "Shit!" Breaking from my supposed trance, I turn down from what was above me to see every single one of my friends running for their lives in the direction of the creek. Once I then see them all running, like rodents scurrying away from a bird of prey, I turn back round and up to the craft above. But what I see isn't some kind of alien craft. What I see are two wings, a pointed head, and the coated green camouflage of a Royal Air Force military jet, before it turns direction slightly and continues to soar away, eventually out of our sights. Upon realizing what had spooked us was nothing more than a military aircraft, we all made our way back to one another, each of us laughing out of anxious relief.
"God, I thought it was done for. And now I think I just shat myself."
Continuing to discuss the close encounter that never was, laughing about how we all thought we were going to be abducted, Dre breaks the conversation with the sound of alarm in his voice.
"Hold on a minute. Where's Kai?"
Peering around to one another and the field of grass around us, we soon realize Kai is nowhere to be seen.
"Kai? Kai, you can come out now."
After another minute of calling Kai's name, there was still no reply or sight of him.
"Maybe he ran back to the den,"
Jaffers suggested.
"I saw him running in front of me. He probably didn't realize it was just an army jet."
Sooty pondered further. Although I was alarmed by his absence, knowing what a scaredy cat Kai could be, I assumed Sooty and Jaffers were right, and Kai had ran all the way back to the safety of the den. Crossing back over the creek, we searched around the den and woodland area, but again calling out for him, Kai still hadn't made his presence known.
"Kai, where are you, you bitch? It was just an army jet."
It was obvious by now that Kai wasn't here, but before we could all start to panic, someone in the group then suggests,
"Well, he must have just ran all the way home. Yeah, that sounds like Kai."
Although we safely assumed Kai must have ran home, we decided to stop by his house just to make sure. We would then laugh at him for being scared off by what wasn't an alien spaceship. Arriving at the door of Kai's semi-detached house, we knock before the door opens to his mum.
"Hi, has Kai came home by any chance?"
Peering down to us all in confusion, Kai's mum unfortunately replies,
No, he hasn't been here since you lot called for him this morning.
After telling Kai's mum the story of how we were all spooked by a military jet that we mistook for a UFO, we then said we couldn't find Kai anywhere and thought maybe he had just gone home.
We tried calling him, but his phone must be turned off.
Now visibly worried, Kai's mum tries calling his phone, but just as we had tried, the other end is completely dead. Becoming worried ourselves, we tell Kai's mum we had to go back to the den to try and track him down.
Okay, lads, when you see him, tell him he's in big trouble and to get his arse home right now.
By the time the sky had set to dusk that day, we had searched all around the den and the grounds of the rugby club. But Kai was still nowhere to be seen. After tiresomely making our way back to tell his mum the bad news, there was nothing left any of us could do. The evening was slowly becoming dark, and Kai's mum had angrily shut the door in our faces, presumably to call the police. It pains me to say this, but Kai never returned home that night. Neither did he days or nights after. We all had to give statements to the police as to what happened leading up to Kai's disappearance. After months of investigation and without a single shred of evidence as to what happened to him, the police's final verdict was that Kai, upon being frightened by a military craft that he mistook for something else, attempted to run home, where an unknown individual or party had taken him. That appears to still be the final verdict to this day. 3 weeks after Kai's disappearance, me and my friends started our very first day of high school, in which we all had to walk by Kai's house, knowing he wasn't there. Me and Kai were supposed to be in the same classes that year, but walking through the doorway of my first class, I couldn't help but feel utterly alone. I didn't know any of the other kids. They'd all gone to different primary schools than me. I still saw my friends at lunch, and we did talk about Kai to start with, wondering what the hell happened to him that day. Although we did accept the police's verdict, sitting in the school cafeteria one afternoon, I once again brought up the conversation of the UFO.
We all saw it, didn't we?
I tried to argue.
I saw you all run. Kai couldn't have just vanished like that. Kai's gone, airbag,
said Sooty, the most skeptical of us all.
For God's sake, it was just an army jet.
The summer before we all started high school together. It wasn't just the last time we ever saw Kai. It was also the end of my childhood happiness. Once high school started, so did the depression. So did the feelings of loneliness. But during those following teenage years, what was even harder than being outcasted by my friends and feeling entirely alone was leaving the school gates at 3:30 and having to walk past Kai's house knowing he wasn't there, and that his parents never gained any kind of closure. I honestly don't know what happened to Kai that day, what we really saw or what really happened. I just hope Kai is still alive, no matter where he is. And I hope one day, whether it be tomorrow or years to come, I hope I get to hear that stupid laugh of his once again.